All right. Well, here we go. You know those Greeks, they like to write plays. They wrote comedies. They wrote tragedies. Some of the comedies, and probably ones that are quite current today, would be the Lysistrata. And you might be aware of the Lysistrata, and that is where the ladies of Athens decided that they would cut off all the gentlemen from any conjugal relations in order to end the Peloponnesian War. This same exact story was taken up in 2015 in a movie called Chirac, which some of you may have seen in regards to gang violence in Chicago. And quite personally, I thought we might be able to use this same theme in order to help the Auburn football team beat Georgia and Alabama. So we'll see how that goes. So that is comedy. To talk about a tragedy in a current sense, I think it would be a tremendous tragedy to miss a single lecture by the one and only Dr. Joseph Kicklighter.
Oh. Hey. You know, folks, I'm going to have a hard time after next week, you know, because I think, what more can he think of? You know, it's just wonderful just to get to hear these introductions. And indeed, next week is our last, but remember, there's lots more coming up. So don't ever think it's coming to an end. It's merely you're getting a long break. Because we are ready to move into Hellenistic times after this particular phase, which I think you will find maybe not more interesting, but as interesting as the Greeks. Because in addition to that, in the winter term, we shall be discussing the Roman Republic, which is a favorite of so many, including the American founders, let's face it, in terms of the classical ideas of the Roman Republic. I was just remarking with a friend here that when we teach history classes, we're always very careful to point out to our students, as if providing a warning, to tell them we are neither scientists nor philosophers nor theater folk. So we are not qualified in any sense to discuss this with great profundity. However, we are in the sense of placing information about ancient science and philosophy into some sort of historical context. So perhaps that is useful. As they say, the bottom line is that when we think of the cultural and intellectual contributions of the Greeks to us, we always recall science and philosophy insofar as we're also, of course, listing history, theater, political science, Bob, and so much else, medicine, virtually every area of intellectual life except, of course, religion. And I don't know too many followers of Aphrodite and Ares nowadays. But that's why we have our important Jewish and Hebrew contribution on the other end. I start off by noting clearly the architectural accomplishments of the Greeks, as well as, of course, the statues. They always say Venus de Milo, but you know, really you should say Aphrodite, considering it is Greek, given the fact that, let's face it, it's far as I'm aware, Milos is still Greek, but since we all know Venus, let us note the famous statue of that name. And of course, I note also a guy who goes to the gym every day, the discus thrower. And again, they don't show, I always say, real folks, because that ain't so pretty. But everybody looks good, right, in these statues. And that's very nice. And to be able to create something like this is just a work which I think is marvelous. All part then of the Hellenistic style. And I'll tell you the truth, you could just go to New York and enjoy a lot of this at the Metropolitan Museum. I'm not trying to cut out any overseas tourism, but I am noting there is a wonderful collection of such works there. Now, as we start out, a few points I would like to note to you. Everybody says Athens this and Athens that, and sometimes I feel bad for the other Greek cities because it's really not fair, given, of course, that many of the individuals with whom we are going to associate intellectual achievement will not be Athenians. Perhaps they will spend time there, I'll give them that. But I just think that we have to know that many of the other cities, like Corinth, for example, Thebes, are responsible for their own intellectual activities. But for reasons of, I suspect, dominance, Athens normally is the one that one thinks of. It's kind of synonymous with Greece. If you stop the same way, I guess, in many cases, even in our vast land, New York City tends to be associated with everything, and then you Chicago people or others get all bent out of shape, as one of my students put it, because you want to get credit, or the Los Angeles crowd, Atlanta, need I say more? You get the idea that Athens gets all the credit. Second, and it always killed me when undergraduates say the Greeks this and the Greeks that, and I say, wait just a minute, folks. At the risk of being called an elitist, it's probably not everyone who gets to be involved, not their fault. But this is, as we say today, a very privileged free minority who are getting to be involved in this, while the rest of the people, the Greeks, if you will, are busy working with olives and such, so that there is the economic, loading those ships, you know, all the, cause I mean, and you say, oh, you mean they're not writing plays or entertaining people for a while, philosophical chat? No, no. Again, the Greeks, we understand, is a very small group. As far as religion is concerned, I always like to remind people there's not going to be any Greek League of freethinkers that are going to picket in front of some temple of Zeus. Yes, it is true that much of the thinking we will talk about is rationalist. I don't think they necessarily are a problem for those who wish to worship the gods. It's sort of like you all just go on about your business. We're operating with our own little group, and we can work side by side. That means, in effect, then, that we do not have two opposite groups, like the God's lovers and then these skeptics. I just think the people who worship the gods are the majority of people, and these folks are looking for a rational alternative without necessarily challenging in a hostile way the various polytheistic religions. At least I've never come across any example of it. Now, the pre-Socratics. Pre-Socratics refer to people, obviously, who are before Socrates. And they are called pre-Socratic not merely because they come before Socrates, but because they have other interests. In other words, if Socrates and the rest of the folks we're going to talk about were concerned about the state of the soul and the existence of goodness and beauty and such noble topics, these folks are going to be concerned about the existence of matter. In other words, topics that we would consider to be, I suppose, even physics or other related sciences. They do so, of course, in a way that non-scientists would probably not recognize, and scientists since the 17th century would scoff at a bit. Because in essence, they are speculators, they are individuals who speak of these matters in terms of trying to find out an ultimate reason for existence. And I think if you were to get to a group of scientists today, that would not necessarily be a question on their mind. So pre-Socratics, often called Ionians because they often live on islands out in the Ionian Sea, and you say, well, seems like if they were scientists, they would want to live in beautiful downtown Athens and be part of the Athenian Academy of Science, and they could get together and say, hi, Plato, what are you working on this week? You know, that kind. But no, everybody is very jealous of everybody else. I've got my lab, and we've got some really hot things, but nothing I'm going to tell you about, because you'll try to get ahead of me. You know, it's like that's very interesting how people of that day each thought that he was, I suppose, imbued with knowledge that he must keep to himself. And of course, such an individual would have disciples. So some of these guys are probably like a stereotypical mad scientist, you know, and living away. They are not there to do humankind good. They are not there to create some new thing that will create labor-saving devices and so that olive people can have an easier time of it. No, again, they are essentially speculators in terms of reality. Now, speaking of reality, there is the one we all know, thanks to some beloved mathematics teacher. Perhaps they're in Macon, Georgia. You had someone who just touched you, Donna? Yeah, plane geometry. No, I know. No, not math. What was it, trig? That was your favorite? Okay. But yes, everybody has different mathematical memories. But everybody was touched in one way or another by the Pythagorean theorem. You can't escape it. You can try, but you're not getting out with a diploma until you meet Pythagoras. And It's quite an experience. Donna, you remember your first bisection of a parallelogram? Do you remember what that was like? I mean, it's still pretty titillating when you were there, that first day in class. Yeah. So Pythagoras, in both mathematics and music, as well as a host of other subjects, again, has sort of a Pythagorean school. And you have these little Pythagorean disciples running around him on that island, and I found that interesting. Oh, boss, I found a new angle. You know, that kind of thing. And you can only imagine the joy that would stir people up. We're also going to bring up the subject of classical medicine, and again, understand their idea of trying to eliminate the gods in terms of diseases and how very difficult that would be, even as we have a name now synonymous with medicine, Hippocrates. And we really don't know if that is just a contrived person or he was real. I know, isn't that wild? It's just, so much of it is just stories. Like so many of these pre-Socratic people, if you want to know the truth about it. But again, all of them have significance to me because they utilize rational processes to discount what they consider to be myth. You know, how people will say, well, so-and-so happened because the gods willed it. And instead, their idea is that everything has a logical and rational explanation. If they had ever, if I've never read it, maybe they did, but I never read it that some one of these folks ever said, well, that's just one for the gods. I just don't think they are going to be willing to admit that. That means maybe they weren't going to be your really big cheerleaders for the gods either. But I don't think they were particularly interested one way or another in the gods of the supernatural. They were there to deal with what they considered to be the rational approach to all forms of reality. One of these legendary figures, and the dates are, I don't want to say contrived, but let's say accepted without much reason. Now you think, that's way back there, isn't it? We're talking about very early times, classically wise, when you think we're moving, or we have moved, into the 5th century, the 400s, and we are going to get into the 300s when we get to Socrates and the rest. So, why is he important? The idea that water is the unifying material, that water serves as the basis for all that exists. I could have picked up somebody else, but I thought Thales is as good as anybody else. You know, when you think, if you want to go earth, air, fire, you know, they all have a different idea. And bottom line is, it's all speculative. It's right interesting, although we don't have a complete work of any of these people. It's sort of fragmentary. But they have their theories, and when you think about it, well, you know, water, that makes sense. We are a lot of water, and the earth seems a lot of water, so there you have it. Why is it significant? Again, I think it's just the fact that he is trying to demonstrate a rational principle behind the creation that is earth. that there is some systematic way of understanding it, rather than it was just a wild day for the gods and they said, let's just create a world or something. I think he wants more than that. Again, the idea of natural laws. Now, I picked up that term, of course, from Sir Isaac Newton. And I think he has a lot more credibility than this fellow. I'll grant you that. I know. That seems ugly, but if you ever go back seriously to school, you may want to read Sir Isaac Newton's Principia in the original Latin. Let me know. I'll admire. Oh, very good. Carol, you can help too with your Latin, so help her with her Latin translations. Yeah, after class, you two can get started. But that is very interesting when you think about it. But he certainly has no explanation as Sir Isaac would have, because we never forget about the creation of calculus. No. Thank you. Boy, this is better than I thought. Yes. People who are obsessed with calculus, this is quite a group. I've never had this before. I'm shivering with excitement. Oh, and here he is. Oh, the man, the triangle. Yes. And I know what you're thinking. I know the H word. Hypotenuse. I know. It's exciting. And I just found this. I thought it was so exciting to see these angles and A squared, you know, the way we were. All that nostalgia one gets in terms of thinking about that. Why is it important for us? Because he is not the first mathematician. Any of you Babylonian fans, I don't want you to jump all over me. Yes, it was the Babylonians who used mathematics first as a process for adding and subtracting and the rest. However, we do give people like Pythagoras credit for having used mathematics for rational explanations of reality. In trying to give you examples, you don't have to when you think of the right angle squared equaling the hypotenuse squared. What memories that stirs. For all of us, you know, and you think, oh, teacher, this is so wonderful. Where do I sign up? I want more mathematics. Maybe you didn't. But a lot of us said it's been great, but see you at the next reunion. Yeah, it's the idea. And of course, I always find so interesting the fact that Pythagoras also had great interest in musical theory, which he attached to his understanding of mathematics, given the differences of tones and sounds, and how he attached that. We do have evidence of that too. Again, probably he was a bit eccentric. I suspect he had one of these island hideaways and lots of little Pythagoreans running around after him, pages, assistants, and again, you could say that magic word like rhombus, or you know all the terms you remember from playing geometry, parallelograms, everybody would just get. You could say magic word for the day, that kind of thing, the excitement. The Hippocratic Oath and the idea of Hippocrates interest in medicine is merely to point out that I suppose there was really Hippocrates. Again, he could be just legendary or a collection. That's sad to think, because many of us have that image of this wise individual. But whatever the case, the significance is that he rejects the role of the gods and insists that every physical illness has a rational cause, which is very important to us. I love this. This is supposed to be Hippocrates, and people are attempting to bribe him, and you can see with the filth of lucre. And they're saying, and you can just see this as representatives of big corporations and saying, "You think we can make a lot of money, Doc?" And you see his hand, "Get away from me." You know, like a professor of medicine or something. "Oh no, I wouldn't touch that. I'm here for truth, not your disgusting money." So that is the image of Hippocrates as being pure. And so when people bring up ideas, you know, we could make a lot of money on this. I'm using my evil voice now. And then everybody would go, "You turning that down?" Yeah. So there you go. If you ever go to an AMA meeting, they might want to have this as their poster boy, you know, that kind of thing. And say, yeah, probably not. Yeah, I know, right? I mean, if you discover the great medicine, I don't want any money for this. I'm just glad to have discovered it. It just gives me the joy to know I've helped people. I dream a lot. What can I say? But I thought I would share that because it is somewhat ironic. However, it is not ironic, and this does seem to be true, whoever actually delivered it, his denial of the so-called sacred disease. And don't worry if you can't read it, because I'm going to read it to you. "I do not believe that the sacred disease is any more divine or sacred than any other disease, but on the contrary has specific characteristics and a definite cause. Nevertheless, because it is completely different from other diseases, it has been regarded as a divine visitation by those who, being only human, view it with ignorance and astonishment. If remarkable features in a malady were evidence of divine visitation, then there would be many sacred diseases, as I shall show. Again, no less remarkably, I've seen men go mad and become delirious for no obvious reason and do many strange things. I've seen many cases of people groaning and shouting in their sleep. Some who choke, others jump from their bed and run outside and remain out of their mind till they wake, when they are as healthy and sane as they were before, although rather pale and weak." Yes, I would think. "These things are not isolated events, but frequent occurrence." Does anyone know what the disease was? Epilepsy. And the recommendation was, it was a curse of the gods, and doctors recommending that they get calf's dung and boil it. Yes. Yeah, that doesn't sound good, but let's face it, some medicines can be difficult. I would say that is extra difficult. But I mean, you say, what has that got to do with anything? Well, again, what do the gods have to do with that? Not much. It's just that I suppose in ancient times, if you see someone having what used to be called, I guess, an epileptic fit, you would think that individual had been seized by some sort of wild form. And so I think the whole classic idea of rational approach to disease is expressed as clearly as it can be. And the still used, though revised, Hippocratic Oath is still a sign of commitment to those principles which Hippocrates presumably valued so much. That's an interesting pose for an individual who is called a sophist. Now we are getting into 4th century. We are leaving the pre-Socratics behind, because essentially Socrates was a contemporary of these people. From the word sophist, I presume we get the word sophisticated. Individuals who are sort of in the know. This was supposed to be a sophist, very popular in some circle, unpopular in others, because they were professional teachers and rationalists. I don't think if you would be having a convention of priests and priestesses, if they would want a bunch of sophists around. Because essentially they are not interested in divine wisdom or any of the sort. They are interested in trying to prove what is true. But as teachers, and has been said, rather ugly now, that teachers are people who can't do, but they can teach. And that's hurtful. But there you are. The idea is these people are teaching thought, and they are teaching how people can do something. In the event, they are teaching people how to be rational, and in being rational, have wonderful careers. It can be as if many of us are teaching the pre-law set. Yes, we've had many of those. And so one can say, if you will follow my advice someday, you can have a lot of filthy lucre. And not only that, but as wonderful as money, you can have public renown. Yeah, and people are snapping it up. This, if you think of Athens or other great cities, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. You've got to be able to stand out. There are a lot of folks, it's a democracy, and people are going to look at individuals who have that golden tongue, and they are going to become leaders. We've mentioned an example already when I was talking about the Peloponnesian War. Some of you remember Alcibiades, and there are lots of them. They're individuals who will gain a great public reputation. And as a result of their skill, whether they are sincere or not is another matter altogether. But they really do know how to shoot a good line. So everybody says, wow, this is really somebody intelligent. We better listen to him, you know. That's politics. So the sophists then develop, I think we could say, a market for their product. If they were in downtown Athens, say, anybody looking for a good sophist? And they say, yeah, I really am, man. I just got an inheritance and I'm prepared to pay some significant tuition. If you could teach me some rhetoric 101, that kind of thing, principles of rhetoric, and get me the tools I need for public recognition. So that's the reputation they've had. I mean, they could win teaching awards, of course, because they were outstanding teachers. But many people considered them shams. Yes. And I guess, if you're teaching actors, the term for actors sort of means hypocrites. So the whole idea then is, are they genuinely pursuing truth? And their critics said, no, indeed. Boy, have I seen this one in high school annuals. Man is the measure of all things. People just love that one. And if they had understood what it meant, I don't know if it would have made so many annuals. Because, of course, it essentially posits a situation when we take the gods and the supernatural out of our speculation. In other words, we do not try to explain ourselves or any other circumstance by virtue of the divine. That is not an issue. I believe it was Sir Isaac Newton who said, I don't need, he didn't mean he was a, atheist or anything, but he just said, I don't need the figure of a divide to prove my theories, because he had physics and calculus. Think how rich our lives could be. So you got to get busy. Right after class, remember. No, she's going to help you, but you'll need to turn in a paper next week. So I don't mean to put you under stress. Man is the measure of all things. Basically, nothing can be explained outside our own human knowledge. You cannot say we are products of the gods and the gods made us A, B, or C. It's not denying it so much as saying that it's essentially irrelevant to their consideration. So again, I just don't know if they would do it in the high school annuals, if they had ever thought much about it, but it sounds nice. But again, it is basically a humanistic way of approaching reality. And it's meant to. Now, the idea, again, that there's something wrong with accepting money for the teaching of rhetoric and logic concerns me as someone who has accepted money for teaching. And Lord knows many of us would love to have said, pshaw, put away that checkbook. I'm just thankful to be having this room full of delightful, that kind of thing. Dreamers. We just can't pay those bills that way. So we accept the money. But again, the idea being that there was something shameful in the sophists accepting money. Now, I must say that, no surprise, education's a pretty elite business at this time. So believe me, it's not like these fellas are working extra jobs to come up with the tuition money. I wouldn't worry about them a bit, okay? It's nothing like that. These individuals from elite families who have plans, shall we say, ambitions, are in a definite paying mood. But there's somehow shame associated with learning and money, as we've already seen with the pose of Hippocrates, turning down, yes, exactly, turning down all those filthy rich people. Now, there he is. If we don't if we don't love Socrates for his looks, he may not be a Greek god, as they say. He doesn't, well, he didn't, maybe he didn't go to the gym every day, but he was very busy, I think, with his other ideas. You know what I put with that question mark? Plato, Socrates. And I think everyone understands that Plato's Socrates is essentially the Socrates that we know. As far as I am aware, Socrates never wrote a thing in his life. He was all talk, not a writer. And as such, because of whom he taught, he made, well, an impression on history that is rivaled only by someone, you're not going to believe this, like Christ himself, by whom he has been compared, not in the sense of divinity, but in the sense of starting the Western tradition of secular thought, as opposed to Christ, who began the Western tradition of religious thought, which I think is interesting if you want to do it that way on a parallel. You got the Greek here and the Hebrew there, and you have these two different traditions. Socrates has often been associated with the sophists, but he is, according to Plato again, he always denied the accusation, I'm doing this purely for the spread of knowledge, the bringing of individuals from the darkness into the light, and that's all very nice. What did he really do? Well, again, it's hard to say. He seemed to have been unhappily married. He seems to have worked in manual job, but he's surrounded by this group of well-to-do young men who are eager to hang on his every word, and presumably, like individuals with the sophists, are learning how to think in the method that we now call Socratic teaching, in honor of the great master. And would that an individual who can do that kind of teaching and make it work, blessed be ye. It's hard. It's hard. Yeah. And it will win you no friends, let me tell you that. But it's the idea of taking the individual and showing such individuals how their thinking about some idea is not well-founded, and then going with that individual through the problem and analyzing it step by step. The individual may thank you later, maybe not, but Socrates was believed to have been almost worshipped by his students. And this is a fascinating business because of the fact that he certainly was not of their class or background. Would that we knew more about his background or the source of his own learning. Unfortunately, there seems to be little or no evidence. Just this guy comes up in Midtown Athens and begins to gain this great following, and from that will come this reputation. And again, many of these students are not individuals who said, because of your great influence, I too wish to be a philosopher. Many of them are there to learn so that they can be public figures. And again, my favorite example is always Alcibiades. Because now you talk about some guy who took all this learning from Socrates and I'm afraid perverted it. Okay? So, he is not somebody that you want to write a recommendation for because you know he's a bad boy. But that is the idea. Now, that said, he was thrown in with much resentment on his part, according to Plato, with the sophists. Because yes, he did challenge tradition and custom and the gods did it, or that kind of thing. And as such, obviously he's going to create enemies because he didn't mince words. He wasn't the most tactful person in the world because I guess he didn't think so. Because he always would say, I don't know anything. I'm simply here to point out what you don't know. That's annoying. You know, he compared himself to a gnat and the city of Athens to be like an animal that the gnat could prod into action. An interesting idea, but one, of course, that would lead to his downfall. I said gnat, you'll forgive me, gadfly, just say an annoying insect, and we'll let it go with that. But here is something more important. The creation of what are called, well, most sources call them forms, which sounds odd. And I've called them here eternal truths, because I thought that was a little easier. An eternal truth is an idea that has an existence of its own. And somehow, as such, these forms or ideas transcend all reality because, let's face it, all reality is here today and gone tomorrow, all that we see. And there's got to be something most believe beyond. And for him, that was these perfect ideas and forms, of which all of us and everything else are merely imperfect earthly manifestations. Like I say, here today, gone tomorrow. Boy, that was hard for me to understand at 18 years old. You know, it took me years to get that through my noggin. But then, when you think about it, you can also connect that to the Judeo-Christian tradition as well. That all of this is from the mind of the divine creator. Now, the idea, again, of the eternal truths does seem one that you say, how did all that get worked out? Well, you know where we're going next. Plato land. Because, of course, that's where we pick up all these teachings of Socrates. You are now entitled, you're going to receive your break. So go take it. And then you can do some calculus problems during yours. Yeah. So, again, we are going to move on. But again, why do we remember Socrates? Well, I think I've already suggested the founder of Western thought will do nicely, as brought through the works of Plato and others. And we understand that he has one of the most famous deaths in history. So that gives one a certain degree of fame, voluntary execution. It's as if you have a choice, but you refuse to accept the alternative. The business of why he came up in the first place has been explained in part by the end of the Peloponnesian War, which I think is kind of interesting. So now you're tying philosophy and politics together, aren't you? He was living in that time period when, I suppose, Athenians were questioning their way of life and their government. Remember, it's more or less democratic, more or less. Now, what kind of assembly was actually listening to the case of the people versus Socrates would be an interesting one to consider. You can actually read Plato's account of the trial, and it is really something when you think about all those people. This must have been a lengthy event, because Socrates was by no means a non-speaker. He was a voluminous speaker. And the idea being, of course, that far from blaspheming the gods or corrupting the youth, he was this, I hate to say wonderful, but significant gadfly of the state. And that, of course, means that you need me. It's not as if I'm some sort of bad element here. I'm quite good. So, cocky, yes, in the circumstances, I think a bit, but that's the way he was. And, of course, popular feeling may have been against him. And this is the third time I brought it up, so you'll forgive me, but it's true. A lot has to do with Alcibiades and people of that sort. Let's face it, some of the people with whom he was surrounded and identified were individuals that had been associated with plots and all kinds of foreign adventures. They might have been friends of Persians, yeah, or even Spartans. So, lands of Goshen. So, it's just, you got to be careful. And so, is that what he's doing? That, I think, has something to do with the idea of corrupting the youth. And as far as the gods are concerned, questioning their will and demanding their students explain.
How did Thales get away with, I mean, he said that things weren't caused by the gods, right?
Yes.
And he didn't get this kind of reaction.
Oh, well, remember, Thales is living in a very different time. And also, he's off just speculating. This guy's in the, midtown Athens and telling all this to all these rich young boys, prominent families, and they're going home. Can you imagine? They're coming home to mom and dad and saying, oh, my teacher says that all of this belief system of yours is so inaccurate. Ooh, Lord, if I'd done such a thing, there would have been trouble. There wasn't a lot of free thought going on in, a conventional home in middle Georgia. I think you can understand, you can get that. And they say, oh, well, let's explain some philosophical ideas. No. You do what's right, young man. That's it or else. So, the blasphemies and corruptions. How about that for French Revolution period? There it is. Jacques-Louis David. Head for the Louvre, people. You think, why on earth would he be concerned about Socrates? I think having to do with the revolutionary fervor of Socrates and coming against all those conventional people in Athens and saying, you can make me drink that old hemlock, but I know what is true. And you obviously prefer to live in ignorance. So that's why I did choose to share that particular painting. I just thought it was so beautiful, and at the same time expressed a kind of truth. Now, the death of Socrates, his drinking of the hemlock and gathering his friends around him, is known through Plato again, and may or may not have occurred just as was told. We'll never know. But it has been the subject of many, many books, and I was trying to remember, perhaps 20 years ago, I read a book about it having to do with the constitutional principles of the First Amendment. Yes, I think the author's name was Stone. Some of you may know the book. But the death of Socrates, his sort of forced voluntary execution for standing up for what he believed to be the truth, was considered a terrible stain against an allegedly free Athens. But when we think, yeah, I guess so in a way, it's just that by their standards, he was given the choice of voluntary exile, and in a sense, he chose to die. It's a bad way to go, though. I mean, you know, when they try to represent it, you just drink the hemlock. I understand it can be quite painful. I'm going to try it to, you can be relieved of that, but I just think drinking hemlock to die is not good. So this was very unpleasant. His most illustrious, influential student, Plato, was quite different in background from his great mentor. Plato apparently was from one of the great families. I imagine, if you stop and think about it, Plato may well have known Alcibiades. And you can just imagine how different two fellows can be. You know, you say they might have been there in the same gang or attending many activities and said, oh, Plato, you're so dull. You're just, all you want to do is talk about philosophy. And I want to talk about Spartan-Athenian relations or secret pacts and deals and cabals and all that sort of thing. So, yeah, I mean, it's just a very different temperament. In any event, if this individual, Plato, had not existed, I guess we would know what we think we know about Socrates. Now, as he grew up, and Socrates died in 399, just as a measure of time, and we're getting now into the 4th century. It is interesting to note that Plato was no little d Democrat. Why? Was it simply because of Socrates? I don't think so. I think it was from his enlightened point of view. And I mean that in the best way. I think he was enlightened, but I think also he was part of, what would we call them, the elite of Athens, that he found democracy to be unacceptable as a form of government. Now, he was not going to try to convert Athens because he didn't want to deal with Athens. He just was saying, look what they do. And He will spend much of his time, and I was just talking to somebody. Yeah, here she is. It's Sicily. He spent a lot of time in Sicily. He finds there's probably a place, Plato lived here or something like that. We were just talking about Pythagorean school. Wasn't it Pythagoras we were talking about? Yeah. Get your tickets here. Plato stopped by here or something like that. Love those tourists. Get those postcards, get those t-shirts right here. In this case, he came as kind of a counselor to one of the Sicilian kings. Sort of like, those Greeks said, I can give you advice, I can tell you how to run your kingdom. In other words, he considered himself a totally committed Socratic philosopher. Every teacher's dream of having the kind of, I don't want to say clone, but someone who is devout in terms of adhering to the master's teaching. And I think to a very great extent, Plato in his works is making Socrates fulfill all of his dreams. In other words, yes, I guess I am wondering if everything Plato says about Socrates is exactly true. But it's more like this is the way we want it to be. In any event, we know through classes in philosophy, don't we, the Platonic dialogues, and of course the Platonic Academy. And you figure that people with the resources that he had were able to create this. So if you're wondering how would he have been able to found an academy and all these young folks could come there to study and do a lot of talking, I would think, would have to do with the fact that Plato was by no means a poor person. But it's not going to be state funded, and nobody's going to give them a grant. So we forget all. So get your mind off to today. It's back in the days when you paid for it yourself. And so it's good when you have your own money, and lots of it. And Plato apparently did. I never heard of Plato having a job. So he is going to be both a disciple of Socrates and a proponent of Socratic teaching. So, all of this is to say that he is going to use the dialogues as a literary forum through which to spread these ideas. And they will be in the forms of the so-called symposia. The symposium has an interesting background. Today, when we think of a symposium, I guess, you've been through a lot of them, Carol. Well, and I mean, they can be fun, but they can also be lengthy, shall we say. We look for breaks. We look for times out. But they tell us that Platonic orgy, symposia could be, I know. I slipped. Yes, there were times when their breaks may have been for adults. Okay, adult activities, adult beverages, and perhaps dancing. Yeah, adult interpretive dances, whatever. All of this, which seems to have little or nothing to do with understanding the nature of reality to me, but definitely something for the wine lovers among us, because you could really enjoy these symposia. But apparently, these discuss, with his students, Socrates, again, and Plato and others are dealing with these very difficult ideas. and of course, routinely being put down by Socrates as one tries to say something intelligent. Oh, many, a class, a seminar, right? We all remember that. I thought that was very intelligent, and then the teacher makes you see otherwise. I thought this was an interesting idea of the Platonic Academy, the idea of gathering around and, of course, everybody just verbalizing away. And again, you're not talking about, have you heard the latest news from the assembly? You know, to heck with democracy. We don't care what the assembly's doing. They're a bunch of idiots anyway. They are talking about the forms, the reality, ultimate goodness. What is beauty? And again, if you try to explain it, then somebody's going to straighten you out on that. So all of this is to say that the academy presumably was a place to disperse Platonic ideas in this kind of, forgive me, academic setting. And thanks to the publications of these conversations, symposia, you can draw out Platonic ideas. The Republic is, I imagine, the most famous of them. And of course, Plato's Republic never existed, but it's certainly one of the utopian ideas. And they didn't have the word utopian back then, but it is utopian in the sense that in that society, which of course is going to be a polis or city-state, because the Greeks were certainly not going to adapt any kind of barbarian idea of an empire. You just have to have a good society, you're going to have a polis, okay? Just no way. And the Republic, of course, will be led, you've heard that expression, philosopher kings. I don't know if that's actually in the work, but that's the idea. Anyone who is qualified to be part of the ruling group will be followers of philosophy, and they will not be married or have property because those are distractions. And so these individuals are totally fixated on the goodness of the state. And as such, their responsibilities, see, they're enlightened. You don't have property, you have to do any kind of 1040, or any kind of taxes, or somebody come run into you and say, I'm in a jam, or all you're worried about is truth. And these individuals, and see, there's nobody who's married or running around, and everyone is simply committed to truth. Chastity, then, is a very, very good thing. So, but we've got to have some reproducing. Okay. Now, that will be the auxiliaries. They are the class of people who take care of business, more or less. That's the next group. They can help us, if some Spartan gets in. We haven't got time for that. That's something for the auxiliaries. We've got a philosophy symposium tonight. We've got some issues to work on. So we've got important things to do. So you people take care of that, or there's a Persian alert. I don't know. But that's their job. No, because these people really, we're going to get to those. But, oh yeah, we got the masses. We always have the masses. Somebody has to do olives, right? I'm saying, come on. But auxiliaries and guardians are, I guess, in a way, a kind of elite. The masses of people, now, they are going to be those who work. Yes, and now you say, are they taking philosophy? Oh, I don't think so. They don't have to worry about philosophy. They've got children, they've got debts, they've got work. And you say, oh, how mundane. Well, only those of you who are the enlightened mathematicians or others among us can understand that. Because the rest of us are also, we understand, we're so caught up in the secular that we can't understand these ethereal beings. Because these people have abandoned their desire for reproduction or the filth of lucre, all of that. And you say, my, I'd just as soon be a Benedictine as one of these. Well, hey, sounds good to me. That's the idea. In Plato's Republic, these are the leaders. How do we get new talent? Well, the way we do that, essentially, is we go to the masses. And it's sort of like Athens or the Republic's latest talent. Remember, some of you, when I was a child, there used to be a show called Ted Mack's Original Amateur. I remember that? And I could see these little OLLI people coming up and saying, oh, I just love philosophy. And then everybody starts clapping. You've been chosen. You're one of the new guardians. And then you come on up, no wife, no children, no money. You say, that's okay. I can study philosophy all the time. Welcome in. So, but, yeah, I know. But that's the idea, that we bring in new people. And they have their pledgeship, and then they get initiated into this group. If you want to do olives the rest of your life, fine. And you can breed, and you can make money. You go to Egypt. I don't know. Whatever it is you want to do. But that's the idea of the republic. Many of you know about Plato's allegory of the cave, and I thought a bit of an illustration, such as it is, would give you the idea of how he views reality and how Platonic education would view it. That people in the cave, like our friends working with olives, are basically unaware of true reality. Only one who is imbued with philosophy understands that what they view is only a dim representation of reality. And when these prisoners then later are brought out into the daylight and see the sun, if you get my drift with sun, then the reality can be just too harsh for them and they want to go back in the cave. It's good to be ignorant. We love it. Just give us our olives and breeding and money and all that. That's fun. This is hard, having to look at the sun. I mean, I don't want that. I want to be ignorant. Sad. But that is the idea, the allegory of the cave of, and you see these people who are the guardians, they probably have a demonstration like that. They're brought in and they say, oh, yes, we would love to do this. Little army, like Jesuits, Carol, sort of like that. They're brought in. Think, what would St. Ignatius say right now? You know, not to use a parallel with all these pagans, but you can see the idea, though, of these philosophical soldiers who are going to be there. We've got to get these people some sun. The darkness of ignorance is very difficult. So, the idea is ultimately that realism, which is not the way most of us think of it, is in essence the reality of the forms or ideas, and the understanding that what we are exposed to is merely the earthly and temporary manifestations of what is true. All, of course, subsumed within, shall we say God? Shall we say the one? It's very hard to know, except I once had a student who said, "You think that Plato might have been a Christian and didn't know it?" I said, "Well, that would, I know. It's like kids say the darndest thing, you know." Because I'm thinking, now, what am I going to say? I'm going to say, well, that's interesting. It says, I think he's just a little too early, but he had some really important ideas, and let's read some more on that, you know. That, you know, I'm not going to get in trouble. But anyway, very, very important about the ultimate reality, and that, of course, could be God. Now, many of you already know that this particular picture turns me on. It is from the etchings of Europe, the great etcher, and it concerns a man there. We just call him Dante. That's all you have to say. And he is there with his great mentor, Virgil. And they've arrived at an area near hell. It's not in hell, but it's near hell. You can hear the people sighing because they didn't make it to the big time. Pagans, yeah. And he's looking at a group, and they all look so very distinguished. You know, it's Philosophy Hall of Fame, that kind of thing. And he notices that one stands out among them. He said, "Master," speaking to Virgil, "Master, who is that?" "The master of those who know." And you're going to say, he didn't call a name? He didn't have to. No one who reads Dante's Divine Comedy needs to be told it's Aristotle. I think not. I mean, if you do, you need to go back to school. No, they're always, Aristotle is the ultimate source of knowledge for medieval people. So I'm showing my prejudice now. Because the idea that Aristotle was just worshipped and adored, this chief student of Plato. I mean, he couldn't make heaven, but within the pagan philosophers, he got a lot of attention. Everyone admired him. And Dante and Virgil were utterly charmed by getting that opportunity. Can you imagine how people of today would grab those darn telephones and try to take pictures of it? Yeah, that would annoy me. Because again, when we think of Aristotle, we understand that he is the master of all those who know. Oh, I know, you Sir Isaac Newton people, you tend to knock him down. Oh, you 17th century, big deal. This man had many more centuries of domination before the Newtonian scientific revolution came along and he came off his throne. Now, Aristotle is a non-Athenian. Make no mistake about it. This is a fellow who comes from up north. Yeah, maybe Macedonia. He was a student of Plato, one of the most prominent, and while I'm sure he was a devoted student of Plato, Aristotle did not necessarily follow Plato's ideas. His writings, his massive writings, cover virtually every area of knowledge. If any of you say to me, "I've read everything Aristotle ever wrote," I will be in awe of you. I praise you. Or maybe during the Georgia game, you'll want to start. Okay? So I'll make some recommendations if you get sad about the defeat of the Bulldogs. His family was a very distinguished one. In fact, it appears that they were connected to Philip of Macedonia, which I find very interesting. I don't mean connected in a relative way, but connected in a patient-physician kind of way. So it was a prominent family. And when he came down to Athens, he did not, I assume, intend to make it his permanent home, but he spent a lot of time there, went back home, or other places. He was somewhat peripatetic, I wouldn't say altogether, but we associate him and his school, the Lyceum, with this whole period of Greek philosophy. And if you associate him with Alexander the Great, of course, you're right too. Because now we are into the 4th century and the reign of Alexander and his great father Philip. That's the time of Aristotle, not before that. So that's kind of interesting when you stop and think about it in terms of, you know, as we've gone through this course, and then you realize this does seem like the tail end when you finally get to Aristotle. I found this, and I just thought this was so good because this is the cover of a book on a syllogism. And you just, I just can't imagine, you know, as a medieval person, I just, you know, syllogisms are our lifeblood because medieval people just got so excited about logic. You know, every Benedictine scholar shouted from the rooftops, I've got logic. And remember, you've got the 2 truths, and then you have the final principle that derives from them. And it is said that Aristotle was a master of the syllogism and the use of the syllogism in all areas of the sciences and the arts as well. If you want to know something, in other words, work it out logically, and it will never fail you if you accept that kind of reasoning. Aristotle clearly did and utilized it, as I say, in such a variety of fields, including physics, political science, and others, in order to prove various kinds of points. That painting, that 17th century painting of Rembrandt contemplating the bust of Homer, Aristotle contemplating the bust of Homer, I should have made lighter, but that famous painting, again, is supposed to indicate, I suppose, the adoration with which even great scholars like Aristotle still held to Homeric writings, which I think is a very interesting observation. Okay, finally, let me note in Aristotle's Politics, and Bob, I know you were right there with it because you see the 3 forms of government and logically in their right forms and in their wrong forms. Notice royalty versus tyranny. In a one government rule, and think about dear Elizabeth, the ruler rules for the good of all the people. Now that's royalty. Tyranny, selfish, sorry, no good. The same then with aristocracy and oligarchy. And then, interestingly, look at the last one, constitutional government versus democracy. We won't do this in a civics lesson, will we? Because the idea is in a democracy, you would have mobocracy. Yes, and we don't want that. So, how do we get enlightened? well, we stick to the forms that are provided in the other column. But the important thing is that Aristotle examined real constitutions and came out with this idea. He did not create visionary utopian kingdoms from his very ample mind. He used real evidence and dissected it logically to determine what was true. We'll pick it up there next time for our final time together. Thank you. Thank you.